I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission, and it is 6 p.m. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Haren. Present. Commissioner Randolph.
Present.
Vice Chair JAHROMI.
Present.
Chair AMAR.
Present.
Thank you.
And we are on Zoom, and we can have public participation this way, or we're not on Zoom tonight?
We are still not allowing public participation through Zoom.
Oh, thank you. And now we'll go to approve the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda for tonight, please?
I make a motion to approve the agenda for today, 3/12/2023, 2024.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Commissioner Haren.
Aye.
Commissioner Randolph.
Aye.
Vice Chair JAHROMI. Chair AMAR.
Aye.
The motion passes 4-1.
Thank you. And now I have on our agenda to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Are we still going to be doing that on these meetings?
No, sorry. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I should have asked during the agenda approval. Thank you. At this time, we can do comments from the public, but seeing none, I'll ask if there's anything online again, just to make sure.
There are no hands on Zoom.
Thank you. And now moving along to the consent calendar. We have 3.1, request to install banners on Plaza Light Standards, Sonoma Valley Hospital, subject to categorical exemption pursuant to section 15311 of the state CEQA guidelines. And may we have the item report, please?
So this is a consent calendar, so you can just make a motion to approve the consent calendar. So all the
Thank you.
reports and everything. So you don't necessarily need a staff report unless that's something that you want, and my staff person's not here.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. The next item is 3.2, request to install banners on Plaza Light Standards at the Sebastiani Theater Foundation, subject to categorical exemption pursuant to section 15311 of state CEQA guidelines. And so I'd like to ask if I can have a motion to approve these items.
Yeah, I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Commissioner Haren.
Aye.
Commissioner Randolph.
Aye.
Vice Chair JAHROMI.
Aye.
Chair AMAR.
Aye.
The motion passes 4-1.
Thank you.
4-1 or 4-0? 4-0. Thank you.
Now we are at the public hearing section, and I believe that we do not have anything under this category tonight. Is that correct? That's correct. Thank you. Moving on to items for discussion, we have 5.1, discussion of design review process and oversight and potential updates. And here's the report for this one.
Yes, thank you. So Jennifer Gates, Community Development Director. So before you is just an item for discussion. So I just wanted to go over, in the last year, there were some changes made to the design review section. I wasn't here, so I'm not sure if you were aware of some of those changes that were made. But upon looking at them a little closer, there's some potential modifications that we may want to make to streamline the process and kind of bring some things into consistency. So I wanted to go through them. So we'll go through them twice. So once I'll go through them, and then we can go back and talk more about the different sections based on your comments and discussion that you want to make. So items for discussion is just, we can talk about them, you can provide direction. There's no hearing about them in the sense of you're not making any vote or anything like that. So it's just gathering input from you at this point. So with that, I will start. So just as a reminder, the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission, you do have a section of our code where it defines what your purpose is and your responsibilities, and The key aspects obviously are the identify and preserve significant historic resource and enhance the visual character of our built environment, design review and historic preservation. So part of that, there's a number of duties and responsibilities. Specifically, the items that I'm going to talk about tonight are specifically H, I, and J. So H being the review of applications for a demolition, specifically. We don't typically get relocation, so I really wanted to just focus on the demolition. I is about architectural review or design review as we call it. And then also sign review. Sign review will be a quick little slide because we are going to do a comprehensive change. So with that, I'm not going to go through all the sections of each code. I'm just going to call out those specific ones that I want to talk about specifically. So in the demolition permit, we do have exemptions for demolition permit. So when Design Review Historic Preservation Commission would not actually hear the item for a demolition. So these are structures that are less than 45 years of age and that are not identified on the City of Sonoma's inventory of historic sites and structures. Then we have another one for detached accessory structures that are less than 45 years of age that are not identified. And then structures that the building officials determine a clear and immediate threat to public safety. As far as the exemptions go, number 3 is definitely needed, right? We don't want to wait to clear an unsafe building from a site. One of the items that we will be bringing, that Planning Commission has identified and we've talked about, that we'll be bringing forward to deal with the unsafe issue is a demolition by neglect ordinance, so that we are looking at buildings, making sure that people aren't neglecting their buildings in order to be able to demolish them, because that is a thing. So we'll be looking at bringing that forward. What I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to go through all of the sections and then we'll come back. What I wanted to talk about is really what do we want to trigger for a demolition permit and to come before you for that. And so I want you to hear the rest of the code sections, and this is where, and I'll highlight some of them, of where we're triggering a design review for like a new building or things like that, and then a demolition. And so are they meeting the same purposes? Are we doing what is intended? Are there some cases where, you know what, we actually really don't probably need to see that demolition permit or that design review permit? So that's the focus for tonight. The other reason why I wanted to focus on the exemptions is because what the actual findings are for making a decision on a demolition permit. And so it specifically says, in order to approve an application for a demolition permit, the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission must find that the structure is not historically significant. So part of what you heard before in an exemption was, if it's not significant or listed on our list, it's exempted unless it's less than 45 years. And so we can talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted to just bring that to your attention. The structure does not represent a unique or irreplaceable historic or architectural resource. That's actually one of the qualifiers to be significant, historically significant at the local level. The community benefit of preserving the structure is outweighed by the cost of preservation and rehabilitation. So that would be a used for if it was historic. The adaptive reuse of the structure is infeasible or inappropriate due to economic considerations. This is another one that's used around historic preservation and preserving the structure over not. And then the relocation of the structure is infeasible due to cost, structural conditions. There are times in which the relocation of a structure would be a condition of approval for that demolition permit. And so this, again, is kind of one of those findings I think that was added to a list for a demolition permit. So it would allow the demolition because relocation would be infeasible. Design review has a lot more exemptions. So these exemptions include the building and site maintenance, the repainting in kind of exterior materials, interior remodeling. If no building is required for the exterior alterations, then no design review would be required. So an example of this would be painting of the structure. Rehabilitated landscape. I'm not going to really talk about the landscaping, but that is one of the items that's in here. I think landscaping is a separate issue, not always associated with design review, but just something that we'll probably bring in the future. And then new single-family homes, 2 units and up to 5 units are actually exempted from design review if they're outside of our historic overlay. Additional ones are alterations into our existing residential development if they're constructed over 45 years ago. And then existing residential development that's constructed over 45 years ago, those alterations are to the rear of the existing structure and not visible from the public right-of-way, and that increase the floor area by 10% or 200 square feet. So think about it, if you had a 900 square foot house, you could do a 90 square foot addition before you would trigger, or less than 90, before you would trigger a design review for that house. But it's not visible from the public right of way. So just some thoughts. And then existing multifamily that's constructed less than 45 years ago, if you're doing alterations or additions to those structures that increase the floor area by less than 20%. That's for both inside and outside of the historic overlay. But yet a new home outside of the historic overlay doesn't require design review. So there's just some cleanup things that we're probably going to be proposing. So I just want to start getting your attention on some of these. So what design review is required for? Any new single family or multifamily development within our historic overlay. And then any multifamily development that's outside of the historic overlay also requires design review. Existing residential development that's constructed over 45 years ago, so it has the potential of being historic under the code. So that's including the alterations to the rear that are not visible. So we just talked about that. Changes in a roof design. Window modification, including the change of the window material, configuration, or opening size or location. So these would include any window modification that happens at the rear of the property. So even if it's not visible from the public right of way. In some cases, you'll see this like a bathroom window may need to get modified, or a bedroom window in the back. And then the repair or replacement of windows, sidings, roof, or other building materials in kind. And then also it's required for existing multifamily that's constructed less than 45 years ago, which makes sense. If you're going to review multifamily development as a whole, then any modifications to that would be reviewed. This is specifically, though, an increase of floor area by more than 20%, or results in changes to the primary or street side. I will say that 20% multifamily properties could be multiple buildings. So is that 20% of the whole project? Is it 20% of the one building? Just some other food for thought around this. So design review has a number of different findings, and I specifically am looking at the ones that aren't historic. So we have findings if it's historic, and then we have findings if just it's in our historic overlay, or it's within our local historic district. And we have 4 historic districts within our community. So one being that will not impair the historic character of our adjacent historic resources. The project complies with the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. This finding only applies if it's a local historic district. You wouldn't apply Secretary of Interior standards to our historic overlay district because it's not historic. C is the project substantially complies with the applicable guidelines that are set forth. And so we do have guidelines in regards to infill in our historic zone. And so we would make sure that those comply with those guidelines. And then D, the project substantially complies with any applicable preservation plan or other guidelines that pertain to a local historic district. I am not aware of any, so this is a question for you. If you have in your past any preservation plan that you're aware of that has come in to play in history and I looked to Michaela because she was on it previously. But it's something there, and it could be something that comes up in the future. But in most cases, that won't actually apply to a project. Sign review, we're doing a complete rewrite, and you can talk about it amongst yourself tonight, or we can do it in the future when we have more members. But we'll be looking to have an ad hoc committee that will be joint with the Planning Commission to look at the signs and determine what does design review really feel that's beneficial for there to look at. Also clarify when we're going to come forward with signs. So especially signs around like Broadway or in our historic districts, things like that, we definitely want to review. Are there other signs that we want to review? Other signs that that you feel are, if we set the standards in such a way that maybe we don't need to review them. So that will be a future discussion item. So if you guys choose to do an ad hoc tonight, you can only do 2 because there's only 4 members of the commission now. So 2 is middle ground. But it's not a quorum still. So next steps would be us to discuss, which I'll go back into the section, and then we'll present changes back to you all based on our discussion tonight of just some thoughts and feelings about what you guys have reviewed in the past. And also, what things that you feel like maybe we've missed as staff or as commissions of things that you would thought that we should have reviewed. And then we'll take all that information. We'll then present a draft to the Planning Commission. This is on their list, their work plan to do. So I want to make sure that we get your input. And then we would go to City Council with those changes. So we're hoping to complete all of these changes within the next 4 to 6 months. So going back to demolition, based on what I've seen in here and just what I've experienced so far around demolition, we do have a couple of structures that the building official has determined that we need to demolish because they're a public safety health threat. With that being said, do you feel that if the structure is less than 45 years of age and has provided staff a historic resource report that says that they are not historic, that they can go through a ministerial demolition permit? Or would you still want to see that demolition permit at design review? So that goes to both the primary structure and detached accessory structure question that I have. So right now it says that its structures are less than 45 years of age and they're not identified. And then detached structures are less than 45 years of age that are not identified.
I'll start.
Sure.
From my experience on this commission, it seems as though we have basically approved most of the demolitions with little discussion that are not according to these guidelines. Just from my experience speaking with the public, I hear so often the concerns and just the worries about the whole permitting process in general being too lengthy for a lot of people to really get their projects done in a affordable and timely manner. So I'm really happy to see this streamlining, and I think that this is a good start because you have to get your demolition permit to do everything else. And so I think that these guidelines are reasonable. Just in my thinking of the future, it's like, so what are going to be the historic buildings of the future if we're just, you can knock this one down or knock this one down? I'm thinking like, would the modern farmhouses someday be a historical resource for this community, as an example? And are we willing just to give up that regulation and hope for the best? Most of the demolitions that we've had a lot of discussion, a lot of public participation in, and things go wrong with have been these older buildings in the historical overlay, particularly on the east side. Those seem to be very cherished and the ones that we wanted to focus on the most here. So I'm pretty much for this modification, and I think, I mean, I really trust you guys at the planning too, that you guys are doing things in a kind of in a similar way that we do. So I think this is a positive way to streamline that permitting process. My thoughts.
Yeah. I agree with Commissioner Amar, Chair Amar. I think that since the inventory got, well, I think it's still underway, but the identification of all of the different historic sites, that was a huge step forward. So that's going to help with this, with C1. When we get down a little bit further, I'm interested in the which structures do not need to come under the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines, because we talk about that a ton up here. And I think I saw something slightly different there. I think if I heard you right, that so when we get there, I can bring that back up. But yeah, demolition's always kind of, well, it is dramatic. And so, and yes, we have had a few projects that have come up that wound up being really lengthy because there was disagreement about whether or not a property, what its history actually was, and how people kind of thought of it. And yes, it was a familiar space that people had been seeing over and over again. So it was a project that I think I know the people that were trying to get the project done got really frustrated because they kept having to come back. But now we also have a law in the state of California about the number of meetings that can happen for a project. So that, I haven't seen that addressed here, but that's what kicked off the changes with this commission last year, because, you know, people said, wait a minute, we can only have 5 meetings and we don't need to add on another design review meeting in there. Let's take that out and put it over in planning. And so, you know, there's ways for people to kind of game through this if they know it's only, they can, after 5, my understanding is correct, after 5 meetings, if things haven't been sorted out, the project moves forward. I don't know if that's actually correct, but I think it is. So, yeah. So I don't see that, the number of meetings situation, I don't see that in here. It perhaps should be, I don't
So
know what you want to do. Maybe you don't want it to be brought up.
So the 5 meetings only applies to multifamily housing
It
development.
only applies to multi, okay.
Yeah, so if you have a multifamily housing project and maybe there's a single family home on that lot, then yes, you get 5 meetings, and that's part of your whole complete permit process. And you're correct. So last year there was a modification so that all of the permits go to the higher body. And so if it's only design review, then all the permits would go to design review. But if planning commission's the higher body because of the permits that are needed, then all the review would go up to them. So design review, the tree, you know, everything goes to them for their final approval. These exemptions are what currently exist right now. I have seen the codes written in 2 different ways. One is your exemptions list, or these are the projects that you have to get a demolition permit for. If I understand the east side development as a whole and the historic overlay. It could be written that in such a way that, you know, these exemptions would only apply in the historic overlay, but otherwise a demolition permit would only be required for a historic resource. So you're creating a discretionary process around a historic resource. And to determine that if your house or structure is over 45 years of age, that you have to submit the historic resources evaluation. Because the question that I have is, you know, like you were saying, I don't know what the controversial, I would say, project for demolition. So it's just something to think about and to respond to is, if we presented in the past a project to you wasn't historic and was more than 45 years of age, but it wasn't historic, you know, reviewing that. You saying some of them were just kind of quick and then some are controversial because of feelings.
Yeah, I recall Bob Kennard's house.
Oh my
in
gosh.
particular, and so this house was not designated historical. It was in the overlay, and we had an enormous public turnout. And this man was obviously so well known within the town. I just kept hearing stories about him, and I still do. And that one in particular, I feel like could have been made a historical resource, and I almost wish I would have pushed for that at the time because of the public response to it. I feel like the public also can make something historical based on the memories and the legacy that is within the community. So that's the one that stands out the most in my mind.
And if you recall on that one, where it was like, well, because the owner was okay with it. You know, he was here that night and he supported. So we're, you know, whatever.
So my question on that is, was there a historic resource evaluation?
There was
There
one
was.
done, and they determined that it was not a significant
And that was
resource.
also controversial.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that can, so the review, the HRE can just get weird too, because there's a lot of professional subjectivity that gets into those reports. That's how it has to be. I mean, people weren't there 200 years ago. So, but there was, the argument on that particular property was that it was historic because it had been owned by the Kennards, and that the Kennards have a significant part in Sonoma history. And the person who wrote the HRE said that that they weren't significant. So, you know, there was all of a sudden it got very polarized, and yeah, that one.
And I don't know enough about that, but
Yeah. But
and-
that's the kind of thing. That
yeah,
can
and we can
come up.
talk more too about the standards and HREs and, you know, so the key on that one in just general, it's related to a person. Remember that there still has to be integrity to the structure that represents that person. So if it doesn't have the integrity that represents that person, then it doesn't represent that person anymore. Which
Right.
I didn't read it. I don't know
Right,
anything,
yeah.
but I'm just in general and just in concept, just things to think about. So it may be that in the historic overlay, that you still want to review it.
Right.
But, and then outside of it, so 45 years and older is the catch because of
Yeah.
what you were talking about as the future. However, you cannot list anything unless it has it's got to be really special if it's going to be less than 50 years old. It's very hard. It's a hard bar.
I don't remember the age now, but
But in this, I'm just saying in
The house is
general.
way
So you
over
see
45
commercial
years old.
buildings and things like that. And some of our commercial buildings look like any other commercial building that you'll find anywhere else.
yeah.
But it's over 45 years old. And so that's kind of where I'm going with some of these instances where there may be cases where there's not, that there may be over 45 years old, but they're really there's nothing about them that's historic or original or have integrity.
So another kind of cool thing that can happen with public discussion, we're just talking here, I'm not trying to support anything in particular, but two things. One, 45 years ago is 1979, so it's not that long ago. And the other thing is sometimes in public discussion, other things are revealed. So the tasting room that is kitty corner from what used to be the corner store, across the street from Maya. I don't know if you were, that building used to have these pillars in front of it, and it kind of looked old. Everyone thought it was old. Well, when the big historic review thing came up, it turned out, heck no, those pillars were just slammed in there like in 1975 or something. They didn't have any relationship to the historic nature, actual historic nature of the building. So the owners, they were amazing. They dug back in and they wound up saying, oh, whoopee, we get to take those off. And so what they've created there is, I think, very, very attractive. And they took there was a whole bunch of covering on the beautiful stone wall that goes down First Street East that's on the side there. No one had ever seen that before. It was all covered up with all kinds of layers of things. So, but some of this got revealed because of the conversations in commission and amongst the public. And they did come back for a couple of meetings. And that's a project I feel like that's a good one. We get a big heart next to that one from on commission. So anyway, just a comment. And one other thing I wanted to mention before I forget it, reviewing all of these materials before things get set in stone. Probably not a bad idea to have the Sonoma League for Historic Preservation take a peek because at some point, because you know, they will have input at some point, whether it's requested or not, and also the Historical Society. But the League, you know, they're super involved with inventories of older buildings, et cetera.
Any other comments before?
Yes, going back to these items, the threshold of 45 years in context of not being in a historical site or structure category is a little bit unclear to me. Let's say if I were dealing with a 50-year-old building and still the historical evaluation report says there is no important historical feature in that building, why do we need to review that? Because I think I'm wholly in favor of streamlining the process and being as subjective as possible rather than really hashing out the potentials that might show up. Therefore, I don't really understand why 40-year age should be here. It could be unlimited if the historical evaluation report says there is nothing in this. And as an example, right across from my place, there was an 1.5 acre site that is now being developed. There was a funky building in the middle of the site that was over 50 years old, but had not only didn't have any historical value, but also it didn't have any architectural considerable architectural feature. They got the demolition plan and they took care of that building. So why we need to really insert a 45 years limit here?
I think, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say the 45 years. So this is the exemption.
Right.
Is anything less than 45 years is exempt. If it's more than 45 years, it requires a demolition permit. But what you are saying is, but if it's not historic and there's no value to it, why do we still require the demolition permit?
That's what
right?
I'm saying. No,
So 45 years is the way to catch the time frame of when we would actually require the historic resource evaluation.
So my comment is whether or not the permit is required, it doesn't matter. If the permit is required for demolition, which in many cases is, and the building or the structure is over 45 years old and still doesn't have any historical value, it doesn't need to be reviewed by this committee. That's my take. And therefore, limiting it to 45 years, then when your staff gets a building with a 46 years old, and the historical evaluation report that comes with it and say there is no value in that, you still want to submit it to this commission.
That's the question.
That's my comment, that it doesn't need to be.
And so the historical value is determined by
Set of standards.
the,
So does it have integrity, and then does it meet all
but
the
not Secretary of Interior's.
Secretary of Interior
That's only
standards is
for
applied when you're
districts.
doing a rehabilitation or you're doing a reconstruction or a restoration. Secretary of Interior standards is different than determining eligibility as a historic resource. So whether that's local, state, national, that's a different set of standards. And I don't want to use that word, but I just did. It's a separate set of
Yeah.
rules.
Yeah.
So that's where your historic resource evaluation is. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so, there could be that, so remember the historic, and we're going to go to it, but the historic overlay, you are required to get a design review for a new structure. So I could see where if you're doing a demo to build a new structure, you might as well do it all at once and go to design review
Right.
for that. But I could see also where if some applicants are concerned about proceeding with new plans if they're not going to get a demo permit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, demolition is dramatic
Yes.
and it is irreversible.
Exactly.
So we got to pay attention to it. And also, it's very visible. So community members can also be like, what the heck happened right there? And so if they're, again, I'm not taking a position really, I'm just putting words out there.
Yeah.
If we just have to be careful, I think, with demolitions. And it puts a lot of extra responsibility kind of centralized with downtown. You know what I mean? So, and which I totally trust you guys.
Well,
But I'm just
historic
saying-
districts and and also the, actually determined eligible resources would definitely come to you
Come
for
over
a
here.
demo permit. So anything along Broadway, within the Plaza, Depot Park, the Sebastiani corridor.
Yeah.
So it's just, and so, just part of this discussion is
Yeah.
obviously historic overlay and our historic districts are kind of some of those key areas, and then anything over 45 years, just to make sure,
Yeah.
just to have that double check.
May I also say, I am so glad that new eyes are looking at all that, like you said, you reviewed all this. And, you're coming from a place of great experience. And so I'm sure that you're bringing that to bear on reading these documents. And so it's much appreciated.
There will be changes to this. There's nothing really specific. It's going to be focused more on the historic aspect, if that's the way we go with the demolition, is focusing on historic districts, historic overlay, and its infill aspect. So that's what that's going to be associated with. There is another section of the demolition permit where it is suggesting that with your demolition permit that you already have your plans for your replacement
Yeah.
to go with
Yeah.
it. So that
I thought that was already in there, but maybe it isn't.
it is. It's not written. It could be clear. It could be more shall instead of
Yeah.
should.
Can you talk more about the idea of trying to get around demo by neglect?
So, basically what demolition by neglect ordinance does is it identifies what the nuisance is. So remember, our zoning code has to protect public health, safety, and welfare. So all ordinances tie back to that. And so demolition by neglect, is saying that it's causing a safety issue or a welfare issue because of the nuisance that's caused. And so it would look to allow, basically create a code enforcement issue. And then if they don't rectify that issue, allow for the city to come in, rectify it, and then put a lien against the property.
There you go.
So,
What about if somebody demolishes something without?
yes, I'm going to add that too.
Okay, because that has happened as well. It happened not that long ago.
Yeah, you typically it's not a criminal act, but you can fine it. And also, so my actually, when I first started my career, I wrote a whole new historic preservation ordinance and
Wow.
had all these things. So that was 20 years ago. And one of it was that if you demolished without a permit, you couldn't build for 5 years.
So there's a property in town that we're probably all familiar with. And long ago, I think it has gone through several owners, but long ago, there was a plan for the particular property, and it was very loose, and the people came back a lot of different times, and then nothing ever happened, and it sat there. And then I think perhaps it was repurchased, I don't know, but the building sat and sat and sat, and then suddenly one day, it wasn't there anymore. And so, you know, you don't want that kind of thing to happen, or,
No,
and you can't, yeah.
And so with that too, I will say the other aspect of that is there are times where I have also seen where you issue the permit. Let's say you give them a demolition permit and you approve the new structure. They pull the building permit for the demolition, but then they don't have the money to actually do the new
Oh,
construction,
yeah.
right? So there's things like that that will happen.
Yeah.
There's not really a way to go after that. But I'm just
Yeah.
stating that that happens sometimes.
happens.
So as much as we try to make sure that we're getting, a new structure that's going to fit in with, where something's coming out, it doesn't always happen that quickly. So, I'm just going
As
to
I'm
go.
remembering these past projects that have come before us, I'm feeling more strongly about it by the minute. And it's like almost like this could be like the most important part of this committee because, like Michaela said, it's wiping something out that's irreplaceable. And so I feel like there might be other ways to streamline things and still keep a pretty tight grip on the demolition process. The landscapes, in my opinion, I don't even have that much experience with landscaping, and I feel like that's an easy one to. Did you mention that one tonight, the landscaping plans?
I was gonna back off the landscaping in general. They did reduce it to minor, so I can approve landscaping. I just need to look closer at the purpose. So we have requirements under the law for new landscaping of a certain size, which is that 2,500 square feet and things. So there's little things like that. I'm like, do we need? Is that part of the package? If you're doing a whole new structure, we want to make sure that you're doing landscaping. So that may be something that's part of that, but not necessarily on its own that you would review.
Right, that makes sense. And also the signs, I'll just mention that I've been for this all along.
Yeah.
So my full support with shifting the responsibilities for the sign approvals. And one more thing, I'm trying to brainstorm what else we could streamline. Is some of these public buildings that come before us, I feel like planning can really get those going, like the hospital and the fire station and stuff like that, where they need to do what they need to do basically. And I don't feel like we can even. I mean, we can say this and that, but I feel like they need to do what they need to do, and there's not a whole lot of our design expertise that needs to go into that. And that's my thought.
So that goes into like alterations and things like that. I still think that you would review, and because it also provides a opportunity, right, for the community to participate in
Yeah.
the process, is that if they were going to do a new structure,
Yeah.
it's like looking back at all the work that went into the firehouse, and how many meetings it had on that community, on that design. It's interesting to look back at. So I get what you're saying though, in the commercial structures and things like that, in that sense, for the public buildings. The other streamlining, so as we talked about, these were the exemptions. In looking at what things are required, I still think new single family and multifamily development and the historic overlay especially. And then large structures in general, so multifamily and commercial structures outside of there, I think do have an impact on design and things. So I, at this time, not recommending modifying that unless I hear otherwise from you guys. On existing residential development that was constructed over 45 years ago. So these are the potentially historic, not necessarily historic, but potentially. Alterations to the rear of an existing structure are not visible from the public right of way. That increases the floor area. We have had situations where you will never see it,
Yeah.
but it's more than 200 square feet. And you will never see it.
I feel like they should get a free pass on that.
So when we're talking about potentially historic or in our historic overlay, and it's in the back, you're never going to see it. That's, maybe there's a streamlined possibility there. If it's in the back and it's a second story and that's a first story in the front, you're going to see it. So,
And it will be blocking other people's
So-
usage. We have
and so
seen.
you'll see that, and then the neighbors will be concerned because then you could look over the fence,
Right.
and all those things, right? So that goes into that potential. Maybe those are the types of things that we're really concerned about, or things that the community is concerned about in their, wanting to look at projects. Change in roof design. This is an impact to a historic resource. Whether or not neighboring property, if it's not historic, if it's like a single story home and you're modifying that roof, I don't know. I look back at, again, alterations to the rear and additions to the rear, we're adding new roofs, we're modifying things. There's no clarification. It literally just says change in roof.
I feel like the roofs are such an important architectural feature of a home that it should come before design review. On the contrary, the window modifications, I just really feel sorry for folks that are trying to upgrade their windows and changing the material. That there's so much regulation behind that.
So what if it's not in the historic overlay, but it's constructed over 45 years ago,
For the
and they
windows.
never had to look at the...
Yeah, I would say they can change their windows, and it's a way for people to increase the efficiency of their home, which has environmental impacts. And I mean, within the historical overlay district, that can have a huge impact, especially the street facing portions, but other homes in Sonoma, I don't feel like it would have a big impact at all.
What if those minor changes change the feature of the elevation of the building? Because yes, you can change the materials, that's fine, within the same opening, compatible material. But if you increase the size of that window or you eliminated that window, that would change the character of the historical building as it was.
Well, as a case in point, at the community center, that building's way more than 45 years old. And if you've been in there, which we all have, they have those huge double hung windows. and they have old glass in them with the bubbles and everything. And I go there a lot. Anyway, we're not allowed to touch the windows because they're working on trying to make sure they preserve those glass windows. I don't know how efficient they are, but they are pretty spectacular. I mean, each part of the double hung is like the size of one of those panels. And if those were suddenly changed to super efficient, different type of windows, I think that would fall into the category that you're saying. It would change the character.
We reviewed the changes to the elevation of the building or the windows in a specific, but the change was within the same opening.
Right.
Using relatively similar
Similar.
materials, but increasing the efficiency of the glazing in the window. That's fine.
So windows are a character defining feature of a
Yes.
historic resource.
Yes.
So are all materials on a building, including the brick. So painting the brick gives me heartburn. So that's a whole nother issue with not reviewing paint. But regardless of that, so what I would be recommending on the windows and roof materials and materials in general is a very clear policy around what is in-kind replacement. And so if you are doing in-kind, so this is where my methodology with code and how I like to write it is incentivize what we want, regulate what we don't.
Yeah.
So if we want people to do in-kind and wood for wood, make it easy over the counter, right? Don't get a permit.
Right, right.
But if you want to do something different, then you ask for permission, right? And so that's where, if it's over 45 years old, is it historic? Do we need to preserve it? And then what are you doing, as your replacement material? Because it's in the historic overlay maybe, or historic district, but it's not historic. So these are the same triggers that we've been talking about with the demolition, is maybe these are our triggers, again, for a more robust review.
Yeah.
Because right now, even a window change outside of the historic overlay, if it's just over 45 years, requires design review, regardless if it's historic or not. So as you said, 1979, if you were built in 1979, and let's say also your windows already got replaced twice, you don't have original windows anymore. So
Right.
what's the difference at this point of replacing them too? So it's kind of setting that policy guidance in the sense of, do we have original character defining feature? And then here's your rule around replacement without having to go to design review.
So that thinking right there applied to this whole thing will change everything. And what you just said, incentivize what you want, regulate what you don't want, that applied to everything is going to cut off all kinds of stuff
I agree.
in a good way.
So what is it that we want to review?
I know.
So my understanding, just looking at it and just what I've experienced, and so this is where I need your feedback, is if you can see it from the public right of way, if you're modifying some feature and you're in the historic overlay, we want to review it, right?
Yes.
If you're regardless if you're historic or not, we want to look at it. If you are constructed over 45 years ago, not in the historic overlay, let's figure out whether you're historic or not, because I have driven around town. There are buildings that are early 1900s outside of the east side.
Yep.
I don't want to lose sight of
Yes.
that just because they're not on the east side.
And that's why that nice inventory was done as well, by the outside firm for that very reason.
So, but then as we know, things change. And so that's why that 45-year mark is in there over time. So requiring them at least to do the HRE and figure out whether historic, and having a conversation around that. Just because of your past experience, I'm hearing hesitation. So this is where I need feedback too. I'm hearing hesitation around an HRE saying something is not historic may have feelings associated with it. And so whether or not it's eligible, if it's over 45 years, you do want to see it?
Possibly. Also, if there might be a way for planning, as if a project comes along that's exempt according to these new guidelines that we're establishing, and planning is receiving a lot of public comment, a lot of letters, and a lot of people concerned with it, maybe that could be a trigger to send it to design review as well.
Okay. So what we could do is redo major versus minor. Major directly to design review. Minor is director makes the decision, does a notice that this in 10 days, if we don't hear from anybody, it is, this, we're going to approve it unless we hear, basically, in
So
10
a lot
days.
of times it's the neighbors that know the most about the homes in their neighborhood
Right.
and the special ones and what's going on. So
Yeah, so it'd be
I would
noticed and
appreciate it.
posted that this is gonna happen. So that is a process that can be developed around a major and minor. And so that unless somebody really cares, then it could just keep moving through the process.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. I turned it off so I could double check to make sure I was saying the right thing, so I had to go look at the
Yeah.
my table again to make sure. So yeah, everything that's constructed over 45 years, regardless if it's in a historic overlay or not, currently requires review by you. So that's what one of the recent changes was, I think.
You mentioned paint a few minutes ago. That we're reviewing paint, right, in certain places.
You only if it's already in your design. So that's kind of that's the confusing part. It's required when we do design review, but we don't actually review paint. So I might have come to you for approval for this paint color, but I can change it tomorrow without coming back.
I actually feel stronger about the paint than I do the windows.
So, paint
I wish the
can
hospital
change.
had gotten a little paint advice.
Paint can change, right?
Yes.
So,
Paint is easy to change.
and
It
paint
is.
Good point.
fades. Paint is paint.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna throw this out there. I'm not recommending it one way or another. I have worked in another jurisdiction that once design review approves a project, any future changes to that project has to go back to design review.
Does that including paint?
Includes paint.
Wow, that would.
Because usually when large projects come, the package includes samples of material,
I know.
paint, et cetera. And we have advised, and we had a person on the commission for a while who, that's her work. And we always look to Leslie for
My color
that
specialist.
advice.
Could that be something that maybe is taken for only like historic building repairs or, not just within the historic district? Could we get really specific that it's on a certain port? Because I feel more strongly probably about roof lines and windows than I do paint, but I like the idea of paint being presented, approved as a group, and then knowing that that doesn't get to change the next day on a historic building.
So I think we can talk about how we want to do moving forward. So once this body approves something, what does that mean moving forward? So a lot of times, in the building process, you change your mind.
Yeah,
But
things happen.
yeah, things happen. But the question is, do you go back to design review every time? Or are there certain things that we need to go back to design review for
So,
that aren't triggered? And so paint doesn't trigger design review on its own.
Right.
right. So, in the lots of projects that have come forward, and boy, has the way people present projects has improved 2,000% over time. But what people sometimes do that bring a project, they'll say, here's our paint palette, and it's going to be this or this, depending. So they kind of get it all. They're thinking about, we might change our mind on this, and it's not like it's either going to be blue or orange, but it's like, it's gonna be this blue or this blue, you know, so those have been really helpful, I think, and we're really only advising on paint, we're not approving it. And I don't think we are anyway. Although, except for the ice cream door that time.
Yeah. I
That
feel
was
like a lot of our applicants as well, like I think that their standards kind of raise just because they know they're going before us, so they put extra effort into the initial design and try to do things that they'll think will please us. And so I think in the end it can end up with projects that are above and beyond what they would have originally been. And then with our input, of course, I think some folks appreciate it and the others are legally non-conforming.
So, you wanted to touch on the standards?
Oh, I just, so, where did it say? So the Secretary of the Interior standards are to be applied within the historic overlay. Is that correct?
Historic district or to an individually listed or determined eligible resource?
Okay, to a particular resource or to like name a district,
Like the Plaza district.
like the Plaza. Okay, yeah, okay, I got you.
So that's when that would apply.
Yeah.
It wouldn't apply to just anything in a historic overlay
Right.
district. So this is where it goes back to, we're in a historic overlay. We may be over 45 years, but we're not historic, nor
Gotcha.
are we neighboring any historic resource. So the Secretary of Interior standards actually would not apply to this project in that case.
And that's where another project that's on Spain Street, I think it might have been pre-Kelly, it got tangly because there was controversy over whether the resource was historic. And so then you had like, well, we don't have to do the Secretary of the, and you know, so it was all over the place and it took a long time.
So yeah, I would probably break out these findings for historic overlay separate from a historic resource and have different findings. So if it is a historic resource, it has to meet the Secretary of Interior standards to be, because it's a CEQA check as well at that point.
It finally was determined on that one that a space that people had been looking at forever, again, was not really historic. It was, and so the HRE finally said that, but that the building itself contributed to the space that it was in. And if it were dramatically changed, it would impact how the whole district looks. So, but it took a long time to get there.
Okay.
So anyway,
All right.
are we helping you?
Yes.
We're making it worse.
No, I mean, you guys are that one side of the history. I haven't been here long enough to see what's happened
Yeah.
for you all, right?
Yeah.
So most codes are written in response to something happening and are reactive, but I'm coming in with fresh
I love
eyes
that.
and I'm not reacting to anything. And
That's-
so I'm trying to
Yes.
take a different approach of like, what's our goal?
Mm-hmm.
And take a step back and just kind of make sure that we're, with the goal of streamlining, which Planning Commission has said too, and what our council has said, I'm trying to figure out what's the most important things. And then,
Yes.
if there's a way to catch those that maybe aren't the most important. So like creating this minor process where, neighbor concern then brings it to a higher level versus an actual trigger.
Yes.
And I'll just say that I've been a little quiet in the sense that I don't have as much experience. I've served for a year and a few months with not as many hot ones coming across. It sounds like emotionally charged meetings that I've only been for maybe a handful of those. But with that being said, I do think I would just, my take on this is like, I'm grateful for this. I think right now we're having code that's more explicit and clear. It's taking some of the emotion out of it up here, and it's just making it a streamlined process, hopefully. But it's doing that delicate dance of how do we preserve the reason why people love driving through Sonoma, hearing about the history, seeing the history, whether it's something of a facade that was put up in the 70s, or whether it truly feels like it's been there for 100+ years. But doing the delicate dance of preserving that, and that's why this town has the charm it does, while also not alienating the community of homeowners or people that are buying those, corporate buildings, because there is an underlaying of grumbling that we've been probably privy to at dinner parties or at the playground, if people say, oh, it's just impossible to get through the planning or the design review, or it just takes forever. And so, how can we keep those emotions in check and say, actually, that's a really thoughtful plan that's been written out, it's extremely clear, and or are there little add-ons that are incentivized to go in the direction we want? Those beautiful windows, instead of going back to sliders, can we keep the casement windows? Whatever all those little tiny differential architectural details are, if we could keep that and then let that kind of flow through so it never has to come to us, but yet we never felt like, oh, we just totally slid backwards and we just lost a bunch. So that's the delicate dance, and
Yep.
I don't have all the answers, but I'm grateful that you're spending time on it. So thank you.
Yeah, and you hit on something too, because the charm of Sonoma is a sort of emotional thing that each person defines differently. So, and people do get passionate about things, and yeah. So, I also like the idea of preserving some transparency to the community, so that we, like we were saying before, when projects come up and people are here in the room, people get to hear about things and get to talk, and I think we all learn from that experience, and it just kind of makes things better.
All right.
Yay!
That,
Thank you, Jennifer.
no problem. So
We have a guest. I'm not sure.
I know that's what I was gonna say. We might want to open public comment in case.
Good evening. Would you state your name for the record, please?
My name's Peter Gallagher. I'm just a big Jennifer Gates fan.
Wow.
No, honestly, she brings a level of professionalism and experience that I admire. And I'm a chemical engineer by training, so seeing thoughtful review of projects is
Agree.
a great thing.
Thank you so
That's
much.
it.
Yay! Now, Jennifer, bringing him every month.
I've actually never met him in person.
Back to you.
All right, so that concludes staff's presentation and discussion for this item, and I'll bring something back to you guys shortly.
Thank you so much. The meeting is adjourned at
I've got comments, sorry. Going to the next item. Director comments.
Go ahead.
All right. So as you know, membership has changed on the commission. So Commissioner Carmody has decided not to apply. So he will no longer be on the commission. Alternates are gone from the commission, and Commissioner, oh my gosh, I cannot pronounce her last name, but Vicky has also decided to step down from the commission. So we have 4 right now. The commissions now will be 7. And then we do have a youth member. I think we're still trying to reach her. But otherwise, we will have 3 more people joining you, potentially. I do not know what that looks like. I think the goal is to bring something forward at this next city council meeting next week. So look for an agenda item on Friday that may identify some individuals for this commission. I'm in the same boat with all my commissions, pretty much. Well, not the planning commission, they're not changing. But climate action as well. The other is training. So I know that I have paid for a membership for California Preservation Foundation. So I paid the membership that allows us to participate at a discounted rate and or free, depending on what it is. So I highly recommend that you look at the California Preservation Foundation educational opportunities and see what that looks like as far as if there's some webinars that you want to do, They could be past webinars. Past webinars I can download for free and send to you. If it's something that's coming up, we can talk about it depending on the cost. We do have the preservation conference coming up. It's at the end of May. I want to say 28th-ish, somewhere around there. It's in Los Angeles, at the Biltmore. I will be going. I'm actually on the committee this year, and we'll be putting together some sessions. One of them on how to do a historic preservation ordinance. I'm moderating. I'm putting the sessions together. I'm not actually doing anything other than moderating and putting them together. But I think I have the budget for 1 or 2 people, depending on what those costs associated with that would be. So if that is something of interest, please let me know, and so then I can figure out how we want to move forward. And it may be, if there's interest by everybody, that we may alternate a couple this year and then a couple next year. And I think that is it for my end, unless you guys have any questions for me. And then the next item is your reports or comments or questions that you have. No?
All right.
Okay.
Do we have any more reports or comments? All righty. I will adjourn this meeting at 7:13.
Thank you.